Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs. Today I'm going to be doing the first episode in a new series which I call In Defense Of. Now the whole point of this series is that I'm going to be looking at an album that the critics or fans of the band really hate, but that I think gets a bad rap and I think is actually a worthwhile album. I'm not going to be arguing that this is the best album in a band's catalogue by any means. But what I am going to be arguing is that it's unfairly overlooked and that there's actually some good music on these albums. Now, the first album I've chosen to do for this series is one that is quite controversial, especially within the fan base, and that is Love Beach by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And can we first talk about that awful album cover? They look like the Bee Gees. It looks like a disco album, not a prog rock album. It's just terrible. But we have to remember where the band were at this stage in their history. They were a very divided band. They would break up after this album. This album was basically a contractual obligation. The album itself is basically divided into a Greg Lake side and a Keith Emerson side. And so I understand at least partly why the band didn't like this album and why the fans don't like it as a result. But I think there's actually some good music on this album. I'm certainly not going to argue that every song's good on this album because it isn't. But I think there's some really worthwhile music on this album. Inside the album too, I should say, there is a catalogue for some really bad merch for a tour that never happened. It says order exclusive Emerson, Lake and Palmer tour gear, but they never toured this album because they broke up. So yeah, let's go through the album track by track, and I'll tell you which songs I think are actually worthwhile, which ones maybe not so much, and give you a conclusion at the end. So the first song on the album is All I Want Is You. It was released as a single. I think it's actually not a bad song. It's definitely a pop song, but there's a little bit of prog influence in it. There's some nice Keith Emerson keyboards. It's definitely one of the better pop songs on this album. After that, though, we get the two songs that probably really give this album its reputation as being horrible. And that is the title track, Love Beach, and then the next song, Taste of My Love. Now, both of those songs, in my humble opinion, are pretty awful. They don't even, not only do they not sound like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, they don't even sound like what Greg Lake would do in his solo career. Now, in his solo career, he definitely shied away from doing sort of overtly progressive music towards doing more of a pop rock kind of thing, but it didn't sound like these songs. And Peter Sinfield, who does the lyrics for the whole album, these are definitely not good Peter Sinfield lyrics. In fact, the lyrics on the whole album are definitely not up with what Peter Sinfield did with, say, King Crimson, or even what he did with Emerson, Lake and Palmer on the Brain Salad Surgery album or the Works albums. But these two songs are particularly egregious in as far as musically and lyrically. They're just really bad pop songs. The next song after Taste of My Love is The Gambler. Now, I quite like this song. I feel like it fits into the Emerson, Lake and Palmer tradition of doing sort of light-hearted songs. Think of a song like The Sheriff from Trilogy, or Benny the Bouncer from Brain Salad Surgery, or even Jeremy Bender from Tarkus. I feel like it fits into that tradition. I think musically it's quite interesting. It's the only song on the whole album where musically it's a collaboration between Keith Emerson and Greg Lake. I think it's a fun song. I enjoy it. The next song is For You. It's a Greg Lake ballad. Again, I feel like this one fits into a tradition of songs that Emerson, Lake and Palmer did throughout their whole discography. It's a lovely Greg Lake ballad. He sings nicely on it. It builds up to a nice climax. It's not a bad song at all. I quite like it. The last song on side one is, to me, the best song on the whole album, and it is Canario. It's a classical adaptation, again, something that's very much in the tradition of what Emerson, Lake and Palmer did throughout their careers. And I think it's a really, really good one. It's upbeat, it's got some wonderful playing from Keith Emerson on it. It's got a bit of guitar synthesizer from Greg Lake, as does the previous track, For You. It's got a lovely guitar synth intro. I think it's an absolutely wonderful, rollicking classical adaptation in the best ELP tradition. Now, side two, there's 4 tracks on side 2, but they form one long suite, and that is the suite Memoirs of an Officer and a Gentleman. And what I'd like to say overall about Memoirs is that throughout it, Greg Lake's singing is absolutely wonderful. I think he sings really nicely on this, even though he had nothing to do with the writing of it. All the music is by Keith Emerson, the lyrics by Peter Sinfield. He sings great on this song. To go through it track by track, the first one is the prologue, or The Education of a Gentleman. Of the 4 tracks, it's probably my least favourite, but I still think it's good. There's some nice Keith Emerson keys on it. The second track is Love at First Sight, which is a ballad. I think it's beautiful. It's got some absolutely gorgeous piano from Keith Emerson on it. And I always think Keith Emerson gets a little bit overlooked as a piano player. Everybody thinks of him on the Hammond organ, you know, sticking knives in it and that sort of thing, and squealy synthesizers and all that sort of thing. But he was an absolutely gorgeous piano player, and some of his loveliest piano playing, I think, is on this song. The third track is Letters from the Front. It's an up-tempo track. Lyrically, it's sort of like done as letters. There's a really nice longish keyboard intro from Keith Emerson, which is really nice. I think it's a really good song. It has a dramatic ending, which fits in line with the lyrics. Yeah, good song. And then it finishes with Honourable Company, a march, which is a bit odd. I mean, musically it does sound like a march, but most of it's in 3/4, which is a bit odd to march to. It's a great Keith Emerson instrumental. I think of it similar to a track like Abaddon's Bolero from Trilogy, in that you have 1 or 2 themes that are sort of restated as the track goes on, but each time there's another layer added, and it builds and it builds. The only difference is that Abaddon's Bolero builds to a big climax, whereas Honourable Company fades out. But I still think it's a really good Keith Emerson instrumental. Again, in the tradition of other instrumentals that he did with the band. So, in conclusion, I think the good outweighs the bad, and well outweighs the bad. I really think there's only 2 tracks on this album that are really awful. I think the rest of it is good. Is it as good as Brain Salad Surgery or Tarkus or Trilogy? No. Is it worth listening to? I think so. I think it really is. I think there's some good music on here, some lovely singing from Greg, some great keyboards and piano playing from Keith. Carl drums his little heart out like he does on every album. I think this album is unfairly maligned and overlooked. It's not a classic, but I think it's a good, worthwhile album to listen to. So that's my thoughts on Love Beach by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There's that awful cover again. Let me know what you think in the comments, where you think I got it right, where you think I got it wrong. what you agree with me on, what you disagree with me on. If you haven't listened to this album for a long time, you're an Emerson, Lake and Palmer fan, I would urge you to go back and have another listen and give it another go. Listen with a fresh set of ears. Try and get rid of all the negative criticism that this album gets and actually listen to it on its merits. And you might find there's some worthwhile music here. If you've never listened to it before, then have a listen to it on your favorite music app of choice and let me know what you think in the comments. Please like, share and subscribe. It really helps a channel like this out. You can ring the little bell notification thing too, and it'll let you know when I put out a new video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.